And that's why I believe in you, because that is the greatest purpose. It's to love. Honest. It sounds corny, whatever you want to say. I don't care. I love people because there is freedom and power in loving people.
Hello, all you positive heads out there. Thanks for tuning your beautiful brainwaves into another episode of the Positive Head Podcast, where we are firmly convinced that creating success and happiness is rooted in understanding the ultimate nature of reality and the fact that as human beings, we are all immensely powerful fractals of the one and only source consciousness, which creates and animates all things. Now, of course, understanding this powerful truth is one thing. Applying this incredibly empowering wisdom to everyday life, well, that's another, which is exactly why we provide you with a fresh serving of soul food for thought 5 days a week to help constantly remind you of what matters most. You are it. And I'm your host, Brandon Beecham. I'm the one who will be here with you each and every Wednesday, interviewing a different consciousness changemaker that is also out there working tirelessly to help catalyze change and expand awareness all across Spaceship Earth. On the other 4 weekdays, you can hear me discussing topics such as my favorite thought-provoking quotes, reading and discussing wisdom from empowering books, playing clips from various inspirational spiritual teachers, sharing a bit of mysterious news, taking questions from the audience, and essentially digging into any other mind-expansive topics that will help keep your soul fed by tuning you into positive vibrations on a consistent basis. And you guys have heard me say that if I ever run ads on this show, it will only be with a company that I fully support because I believe their intention is to make a positive difference in the world. Well, I'm pleased to announce that day has arrived and that this episode of the Positive Head Podcast is being brought to you thanks to the support of Gaia. If you're not familiar, Gaia is the go-to source for streaming consciousness content online, and you can sign up for your first month for only 99 cents at gaia.com/positivehead. That's spelled GAIA.com/positivehead. Check it out. All right, all you positive heads, on this week's interview episode, I'm absolutely thrilled to have Nassim Haramein here with me on the show. Nassim has spent the last 30 years of his life researching physics, geometry, cosmology, quantum mechanics, and ancient civilizations. In his studies, he's actually discovered a fundamental geometry of space leading to a unified field theory. Hello, Nassim. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Oh, so wonderful to have you. It's you've been on my list for a while to get on the Positive Head podcast here, and I'm super excited. You know, I met you briefly at Lightning in a Bottle last spring, and even going back before that, you know, I caught some of your talk there, and going back before that, it's like you were right up there on my list. So I'm very appreciative to have this opportunity to pick your brain, and it's just a matter if I can get to all the questions that I have for you in a time that will make sense for for either of us. So I'm going to do my best to try and narrow this down to, you know, what I feel are some of the most pertinent questions.
Okay, sounds good.
Excellent. So to start things off, if someone gets in an elevator with you and asks you, what's your passion, how you spend your time, and you only have, let's say, 10 floors to answer, what do you say?
10 floors? Depends how fast the elevator is.
Yeah, exactly. You would have that as a response.
I would say my passion is understanding the nature of reality and how we happen to exist in it. You know, if that was
Perfect.
a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be the very short answer, you know.
That's funny because that's what I always say about this show is it's all about trying to understand the ultimate nature of reality, as I like to put it. So you're pretty much right on with what we're trying to uncover here. So
Great.
So having watched your documentary Black Hole a few times, and it really took a few times to try and absorb all the amazing information there, highly recommend it. And that's Black Hole, WHOLE, to anyone listening who hasn't seen it. You give a great story about sort of how you started down this fascinating journey that is your life, that took place on a school bus when you were like 9-10 years old, I believe. Can you, to give us a little background, share a little bit of that story with the listeners?
I had all kinds of esoteric experiences when I was really young, but then eventually I had this lesson in geometry that day at school, and it's funny because Buckminster Fuller had a very similar experience, but in this lesson they showed us how a point had no dimensions and basically didn't really exist, and then because it didn't have a volume, and then a line, dimension 1, was like a line was made out of dots, and then dimension 2 was like 4 lines that made a plane, and then all of a sudden the third dimension was 6 planes, slapped together into a cube, and that one had volume, so that one was, real. And
right.
I was just kind of like blown away by this, because I thought, if the dot doesn't exist, that makes a line that doesn't exist, that makes a plane that doesn't exist, then it doesn't matter how many planes you slap together, you're not going to get existence. So to me, this whole, mathematical concept, from which, I eventually found out, at the time I didn't know, but most of our physics, most of our math is based on flat dimensional surfaces and, some kind of like, one-dimensional strings and, all kinds of stuff like that. And it just, it's a mathematical concept that is not real in the universe. And so it gives us the wrong idea about the way the universe functions, or at least an inaccurate idea of how the universe functions. And so I went on much later on to try to figure out dimensions. But one thing that happened that bus when I was a kid is then I thought, well, how do I resolve this riddle? And and I closed my eyes and I expanded my consciousness like larger than the bus, and imagined myself floating above the bus, like really, really high in the ionosphere. And the bus would look like a dot. And then I backed up some more and the earth would look like a dot. And I backed up some more and the solar system would look like a dot. And eventually the galaxy would look like a dot. The cluster we're in would look like a dot, and so on. And then I flew back into the bus and I looked at my hand and I saw the cells on my hand would look like dots. And then the cells are made out of about 100 trillion atoms, like each one looking like a dot. And then, in the center of each atom is a little dot we call a proton, and so on. And so I was like, the solution to the riddle is that it's the exact contrary. The only thing that exists is the dot. A spherical volume that encloses space at different scales. And so that was the start of my whole journey into understanding the structure of space-time.
What a journey. And it says volumes. I was the kid in the back of the bus, like pulling the girl's pigtails, and you're over there figuring out the nature of reality. Hence of me interviewing you right now. So everything's starting to make a lot of sense here.
I could never get close enough to the girls to pull their pigtails.
I guess there's trade-offs, right? So you won a Best Paper Award for the Schwarzschild proton in the field of physics a few years ago that suggested atoms are actually mini black holes, which led, of course, to your documentary Black Hole. Can you give us a layman's explanation of what your paper demonstrated?
Well, first of all, I got that paper became so controversial. I got so much tomatoes thrown at me for it. But what I was pointing out there, and it was incomplete, and that's why I got some tomatoes thrown at me. But actually, it was pointing out something very important, and some of the stuff that was unresolved. I resolved in my latest paper, the quantum gravity and the holographic mass. But, and it's normal when you're writing, the first, concept of a theory, like string theory has never been resolved in some 30 years of, or 25 years of investigation. And in fact, it's becoming abandoned by most physicists because there's just no solution. What I was pointing out is very, very important. And it was that if we make the little proton in the nucleus of an atom a little black hole, if we assume it's a little black hole and we calculate how much gravitational force that little black hole would apply to another little black hole, another little proton black hole, then you could, when you calculate that force, like two little black holes attracting each other and spinning around each other, it's exactly the force. Exactly the force that we measure, or that we call the strong force that holds the nuclei together. And so what I was pointing out is that the strong force that was artificially placed in there by us, because we couldn't figure out what was holding the protons together, because the protons are positively charged, right? They should repel each other.
Right.
Just like two magnets repel each other if they have the same charge. When that was discovered, they realized there must have been a really strong force to hold the protons together inside the nuclei. And they invented a new force because they thought that gravity was too weak. And what I was pointing out is, no, gravity is not too weak. It's the energy level of the protons are much higher than what we think. And actually they're little mini black holes. And then the gravitational force of these objects is exactly what we measure. So that, to me, could not be a coincidence.
Right.
But of course, it was so stunning and hard to swallow for the mainstream that what we were calling little, proton and little atoms were mini black holes. It created a lot of controversy.
Yeah. Would you say this, and that's been what, 5-6 years ago or so since that paper?
That was published in 2008. So it's a while.
Okay. And you've had a more recent paper, Quantum Gravity and the Holographic Mass, that you predicted the radius of the proton. Can you tell us what the significance of that is and how it sort of expands on your previous work? Yeah,
on the Schwarzschild proton paper. So what happened is that in the Schwarzschild proton paper, I needed to be able to in order for the little proton to be a black hole, it had much more energy or much more mass than what we measure in laboratory. So I had to explain how come we're not measuring that mass. And so I wrote this other paper. It took me 5 years to solve these equations, but I realized, because what happened, so I got to back up a little bit.
Okay.
When I described the little proton as a black hole, I described it by calculating how much vacuum fluctuation or information is present inside a proton. So let me explain that a little bit. In quantum physics, space is not empty. Okay. It might sound weird to the layman that space is not empty, because space seems to be empty, but it's not. It really isn't. And you can think of it like although the space around you seems empty, it's full of electromagnetic waves, like radio waves, like X-ray, like infrared, all these different frequency of the electromagnetic field. You're not necessarily directly experiencing them, right?
Right.
So we think of it as empty, but it's not empty. Actually, it's full of all these electromagnetic fluctuation. Well, there's little electromagnetic fluctuation that are vibrating like so high, like super high frequency, very, very, very short wavelength, like billions of times smaller than an atom. And the space is full of it. In fact, the fabric of space is made up of this stuff that we call Planck oscillators, because they have to do with the Planck constant. And they're basically little teeny electromagnetic waves, but because they're really teeny, there's a lot of them in a centimeter cube of space. There's a lot of energy. Like in a centimeter cube of space, there's 10 to the 93 grams per centimeter cube. So it's more than the whole mass of the universe in terms of energy is present in the centimeter cube of space in terms of these little fluctuation of the electromagnetic field. It's really non-trivial. It's really important. And so what I said is, what if the proton, the little, because we know they're not little billiard ball. All we can say when we look at the proton is that in that region of space, there's a really high electrostatic charge, but it's not like a little object. It's just a charge. So I said, I thought maybe, what if a proton is just a structure, like a little vortex of these electromagnetic waves at the Planck scale that are all spinning together in that region that makes a little knot in space that we call a proton. So I calculated, and so that's what I did. I calculated how much of these electromagnetic waves was inside the volume of a proton to see if it had enough energy to be called a black hole. Well, it definitely did, because the number that came out was the exact mass of all the other protons in the universe.
Wow.
Meaning that all the information of the universe, of all the matter in the universe, was present holographically in one proton due to these vacuum fluctuation. Like you could think of it as information, just like, oscillating electromagnetic wave can carry information of a radio station, right? And so it was like, wow, that was just stunning, because right there was a mathematical proof that everything is one, that every proton is connected to every other proton. But now I had to explain, how come we're not measuring the mass of the universe when we measure the mass of a proton, right? And so I had to explain, well, how come we're only measuring a very small percentage of that mass, like a very, very, very small. The proton is 10 to the minus 24. And so it's very, very small mass. And I realized, well, wait a minute. If you have all the information inside the vacuum fluctuation inside the volume of a proton, but the surface is going to restrict how much of that information is accessible from the outside, because if it's a little black hole, of course it'd be a little black hole if it has the mass of the universe in it. If it's a little black hole, only the outside would be available to us. Only a very small portion of the energy would be available to us to measure. And because you gotta keep in mind that mass is energy. It's not necessarily weight, right? So, so I had to figure that out, and it took me 5 years. And when I found the solution, it was so simple. It turns out that if you calculate the amount of imagine, I was trying. The concept was that maybe I can find an equation in which I was thinking maybe the mass of one proton is actually the influence of information of all the other protons that are in the universe that are connected to that one proton. So I had to try to figure out a way to,
That's an interesting concept.
Right. So I had to try to figure out a way to calculate what would be the influence of all the other protons in the universe on one proton. And it was like kind of mind racking. And certainly I was thinking, oh my God, but these numbers are huge. The mass of the universe is involved. So I was thinking, even if I find the equation, it's probably going to be very imprecise because these are huge number. And I got to nail the mass of one proton, which is a really small number. So I was really, it was kind of a crazy wild goose chase.
Daunting.
But eventually I realized that it was actually really simple, is that I did a surface to volume ratio of the little Plancks, meaning I calculated how many of the little fluctuations are on the surface and how many on the inside. The inside has the mass of the universe in it, as I told you. The surface has much less. And so the ratio, and then I multiplied the ratio by the mass of one Planck to get the energy of the ratio. And it was the exact mass of a black hole. It worked for universal size black hole, like for the center of galaxies and all this. And then I applied it to the proton and it nailed the mass of the proton incredibly accurately. And then I reversed the equation to get what the theory would predict the radius of the proton should be. And I put that in the paper because it disagreed with the mainstream radius of the proton by 4%. Right. And I published it and saying, actually, the equation is exact for cosmological black holes. So it must be correct for the proton. So our data must be incorrect. And I thought maybe I won't live to see the day when it's measured more precisely to prove or disprove me. But it turned out that unbeknown to me, there was an experiment in Switzerland that was going on to measure the radius of the proton more precisely than ever before. And these results were published a month and a half after I published my paper or sent it to the Library of Congress. And the measurement came in 4% smaller than the mainstream and agreed extremely well with my prediction. In fact, my prediction is inside the margin of error of the experiment. So actually, my prediction might be more precise than the experiment at this point still.
Wow. Were there people going around picking up rotten tomatoes from your previous paper then?
Yes, there was. And actually, I was promptly invited to present my paper at CERN. And, it was very exciting. But then tomatoes got thrown again. And the
life of a renegade.
Of CERN, yes, and the director of CERN's canceled my talk and threatened some of the physicists that invited me and so on, the scientists that invited me and so on. So it was kind of like a really disappointing moment, but it's okay. The truth will prevail.
Yeah, the truth always prevails, and when you're pushing the envelope and sort of pushing people to look further and ask those questions that a lot of times people won't ask, like you demonstrate in the black hole, who's the guy blowing up the balloon, right?
Right.
Yeah. When you ask those sorts of questions, it's bound to get some pushback. So I was not as aware of the recent work. When was this recent paper, the quantum gravity and holographic mass, actually, when did you release that?
I released it in, let's see. So, it was on the 20th, or 21st of December, 2012 that I sent it to the Library of Congress. Okay. And I think it was not until like some 6 months later that it was published in a scientific journal after passing peer review.
Wow. Now, would you suggest then, based off of all your studies, that we actually live inside of a black hole as well?
Right. That's the other thing is that if you take the mass of the universe, and so it's 10 to the 55 grams, and you put it in the bubble of the observable universe, which is about 10 to the 28 centimeters, and you make that calculation, the universe obeys a perfect condition for a black hole. It's got the exact correct mass for it to be a black hole. So, we could be living in a black hole, absolutely. Actually, I'm pretty sure we are. But because you see, and actually, since I've been saying that for like some 25 years, some papers came from other physicists showing that, they could be whole worlds inside black holes, because some black holes are large enough that the density is not that high. Like our universe doesn't look so dense to us because we're really small. But if you actually look from the outside of our universe back at our universe, you would think it's really dense because it's a black hole. So, so like large black holes can have a fairly low density, because they're big enough to have enough mass. So, for instance, black holes in the center of galaxies have approximately the density of water, and stuff like that. So, we could be living just to cut to the chase, my theory pretty well proves at this time, and I've got some really good discovery I made like a week and a half ago, that that basically we are, living in a black hole, and everything that inside that black hole that we call, we know quasars and galactic centers and some stellar objects are black holes, and then atoms are black holes. It's all kind of black holes from the top down, and this is really actually what I had found out when I was 10 in my bus. I didn't explain it that way. I didn't give the details that way, but that's what I was kind of visualizing, like concentric singularities going from infinitely big to infinitely small.
Yeah, I have a very inquisitive, intelligent young nephew, and I actually showed him some of your work. And his question was, so if we live inside a black hole, do you believe there's another universe on the other side of each black hole?
Well, the tendency we have is to think in terms of like linear parallel things. I definitely believe that the black hole we're in, that we call the universe, is most likely just one bubble inside a larger black hole multiverse that, has a bunch of universes our size in it, maybe billions of them, and then that big bubble that billions of our universe would be in is probably part of a larger bubble, and so on and so on, right? I see no reason why it would end at any point, or start at any point. And so, but what's important is that from any scale, then there's harmonic relationship between scales. And so there is a finite pixel size for every bubble, meaning like for us, the pixel size of our universe, the fundamental building blocks of our universe is these little Planck oscillators that makes up the protons and makes up the electrons and, and all the matter in our universe. And I've proved that. I've proven that in those two papers you mentioned, and now there's a paper coming up that's gonna actually put the nail in the coffin, if you'd like.
I can't wait for that. So when you make the reference to holographic mass, or, I've seen holofractographic universe or quantum holographic. Can you explain, a lot of people, they hear hologram and they instantly think of Tupac or Star Wars or something like that. Can you explain what exactly you're referring to when you make, use that terminology?
Right. So a hologram is, it's kind of an interesting thing. It's a piece of photographic plate, right? So that has an image on it that has been imprinted by an interference of two lasers. So you imagine you put an apple in the space, and in a dark room, and you hit it with a laser, and then so that the laser photons scatter on the photographic plate to imprint the image, just like a camera. But before that imprint occurs, there's an interference from another laser that makes it so that the imprint of the apple on the photographic plate is like little ripples of interference. And what happens is when you then take the photographic plate and you shine a laser on it, a 3D apple appears in the space projected from the plate. And it's very remarkable. And what happens is that you can cut that in half and shine the laser and still get the apple. And you can cut it in half again, or it's now quarters, and you're gonna still get the apple, and so on and so on. You can cut, smaller and smaller pieces. The information is holographically embedded through the interference pattern, so that every point on the plate has actually all the information of the apple. And it's an incredible phenomenon. And so what we're saying is that these little Planck oscillators, they act like little interference waveforms that do the same thing with the structure of the universe. So when I say all of the information of the universe is in one proton, it's not like I'm saying all the other protons in the universe are in one proton. I'm just saying the information of these other protons are present. Just like, if you have a beautiful orchestra music on a CD, it's not like the violin is on the CD. It's not like the piano is on the CD. It's the information that's on the CD, right?
Good analogy.
Yeah. So that's really what we're talking about.
Wow. So there's some real truth to the statement when people say the universe is within you. Of course, you have a lot of people very spiritually minded, myself included, who talk a lot about the oneness of all things and the connectivity of the universe. And that's what fascinates me about work like yours. It's really, I feel like there is a merging of spirituality and science that is happening right now, thanks to people like yourself who are on the forefront of this, that are really making people like me sound more credible. So, do you feel like there's a real, merging happening as far as this spiritual concept of oneness in correlation with, the oneness on a physical level?
Oh, yeah. I mean, first of all, it actually gives some grounding to the concept that we're all one, that
that's exactly what I'm kind of getting at.
Yeah, that every point contains the whole. I mean, so many masters have walked the earth saying these things. That the kingdom of heaven is within you. I mean, literally the heavens. And so, but until it's actually described in physics, it just remains in dogma and spirituality and religions and
philosophy, right?
And philosophy, but then all of a sudden, if it becomes like no, this is really the way things work, then it's a whole other story,
Yeah.
and it removes the dogmatic parts of it, and actually gives us like real grounding to be able to not just like have faith that these concepts are true, but actually being able to prove that this is actually really the way things work. And then you can imagine the implication, philosophical implication to you're made out of 100 trillion atoms, each 100 trillion cells. Each one is made out of 100 trillion atoms. So you're made out of 100 trillion by 100 trillion atoms. And so like, and each one has multiple protons and each one contains all the information in the universe. Like that is kind of mind-boggling. And it starts to tell you something really profound about yourself.
Yeah, it really, if anything points to the unlimited, infinite potential of man, I would say that does.
Right. It's an amazing thing. I mean, but that's the thing is even at the biological level, 100 trillion cells that self-organize and function absolutely perfectly, does not point to a random universe that's disconnected and doesn't know what it's doing. It really doesn't. It points to the exact contrary. It points to a very highly coherent, very organized, very highly connected, very codependent, interdependent universe, not, a disconnected one, random universe. So, people's existence is a miracle, and I mean, very fundamentally.
Absolutely. In your documentary, The Black Hole, you talk about the torus and the sort of, as this infinite abundant energy force. Can you explain a little bit what that is and why it's important?
Yeah, so if you think of that flow of the little Plancks, so you'd have the whole thing is spinning, right? So each Planck is a little spinner because it's without getting into many details. In physics, it's called a quantum of action. It's the Planck constant, and the Planck length is a function of that. And so basically you're looking at little spinners, and then all the little spinners are spinning together in larger, and there's billions of them. Like for one proton, there's billions and billions of them. They're all spinning together. So you can imagine the spinning of the torus being, the result of all these Plancks spinning together. And the dynamics of these Plancks spinning together, would create this flow between the equator and the poles, where it's going out at the equator and into the poles. So it's absorbing Plancks at the pole, and it's spitting Plancks out at the equator in a continuous feedback of information.
Right.
And this is actually how the dynamic information flow of the universe occur at the very, very fine level. And then the feedback is reproduced in different scales, little fractal scales as you grow farther and farther, larger and larger. And eventually the feedback and all of nature you observe around you is based on feedback. That's how nature evolves. It gets information from its environment and then modify its behavior in order to be harmonious with its environment. You could even start to understand that this torus structure of information moving out and moving back in at the poles is like the structure of consciousness, meaning that consciousness is basically just the feedback of information between you and this Planck field. And this is why you become self-aware. Self-aware is feedback. It's you looking yourself in the mirror and knowing it's you, and so on. So this is, very fundamental pattern, this torus pattern. You see it at galactic structure. You see it in hurricanes. You see it in tornadoes. You see it in the plasma dynamics of the sun, the weather dynamics of our planet, the ionosphere, all this stuff, like you see it everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. And, of course, you talk about the vacuum being full of, all this energy equates to the mass of the entire universe, as opposed to just being empty space. Do you believe that we're close to being able to pull energy from this vacuum and, create infinite, abundant energy on planet Earth?
Oh, yes. That's a good question. Yeah, we are. We are very, very close. In fact, we've been there for a fairly long time. I mean, some of the work that Tesla was working on, Moray, many others, but the social, political, and industrial environment has not been permitting for these kind of
being
technologies.
Squashed, do you think?
Oh, I know. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But, it's now kind of oozing out the edges, and, inventors all around the world are getting there. And I've been able to verify a few different devices. Some of the devices are in the mainstream. For instance, if you look up EM Drive, EM Drive was tested by NASA recently, and it was invented by a physicist in England, which couldn't get anybody to test it because they all said it was violating the laws of motion. Because the thing is just a little conic can that you put microwaves in, and it concentrates the microwave in one corner and one in the front of the can, and less on the back, and it creates basically a little bit of a gradient, a little bit of a differential in the structure of the Planck field. And the device starts to move on its own. It's not expelling anything out the back, and it's producing thrust. And,
wow.
And that's why nobody wanted to test it, because they all said it was impossible. So like the guy took some 10 years to get anybody to even want to test it. That's how difficult it is to push a new idea through. And then when NASA finally tested it, it was Sonny White at NASA that tested it. He got in trouble for it as well. The results were positive. I mean, the thing actually produced thrust with not that much energy. And in this report, he even mentioned that it's most likely pushing against the structure of the vacuum.
Wow.
So we're starting to know how to engineer it. Even in the mainstream, again, there's a thing that's called the dynamical Casimir effect, if you look it up. And in that case, we're able to extract photons from this vacuum field. We're literally extracting photons of energy out of the vacuum, out of something that we thought was empty.
Wow. That's essentially something from supposedly nothing, right?
Right. Exactly.
Wow.
Actually, those articles on the dynamical Casimir effect, I think the more popular ones are called that way, something from nothing.
Wow. Interesting. I will definitely look into that. So you hear a lot of talk these days, increasingly so, about sacred geometry and the flower of life. And that's something that you reference in your documentary as well. What can you tell us about how that plays into this? It
doesn't, have, what happened is that, well, first of all, there's a lot of things to say about ancient civilization that don't just add up to they were primitive and we are advanced. There's something seriously weird that happened on this planet, because there's some very advanced, building techniques that we
still can't duplicate.
Yeah, that we still can't, not even close to be able to duplicate with our advanced technology. I mean, I'm talking not even close, like not anywhere close. Like the Grand Pyramid at Giza is, as an example, because it's the most famous one. But it's made out of 2,300,000 stone. You know, the apex is 1/4 of an inch off the base, which is 13 acres. Like after placing 2,300,000 stone, there's nothing. You know, the average stone size is like some 2.5 ton. Some of the stones at 135 feet of altitude are like in excess of 100 ton. I mean, it doesn't end. You know, it's one after the other. Like, and if it was just one anomaly here or there, that'd be one thing.
Yeah.
But it's like there's thousands of anomalies all around the world, like thousands that just don't fit the. They were primitive and we are modern. You know, it just doesn't add up.
Right.
So, so there is evidence that these guys had knowledge that was lost at one point or another. And so when you do those studies, you find that they seem to all agree on a few very important points. At least like a majority of these ancient civilizations seem to agree on a few very important points. One was that they all describe this field of energy that was at the base of creation. Like they called it mana, chi, you know, all kinds of different names.
Right.
And they all seem to describe the way this field function with very specific geometric constraints. That this field is not just like a mess of, you know, fluctuating things, but that there's actually coherent polarized type geometry in it. And you know, I studied that for 20 years while I was studying physics. And I found very, very similar relationship between what they were saying and the modern physics I was studying. And so basically I started, but I roughly came up with this idea that the structure of the vacuum, these Plancks, must be tetrahedral in nature, that it was some kind of tetrahedral grid, you know, that it was producing toruses and all this stuff. But that was before I wrote this proof. So it was heuristic. It wasn't, it wasn't based on mathematics. It was based on deduction and intuition from what the ancient civilization had said and from the physics I was studying. But when I wrote this equation, I didn't do this on purpose at all. I didn't. It just came out that way. It just blew my mind. I could have put an adjective in there that I shouldn't say on the air. It was that when I made the calculation, I made the little Planck's little spherical structures. So I call them Planck spherical units, and to count them, right? And when I did the calculation that gave the exact radius and mass of the proton and black holes in the universe, I could extrapolate from the equation what the geometry should be of these little spherical units of Planck's. Like, for instance, they couldn't be adjacent to each other, just touching, tangential to each other. They had to, because that would leave little spaces between them, and the equation said there was no space. So I had to push them one into the other. And when I did that, they made up the flower of life geometry. And so literally the solution to mass and gravity that I found is the flower of life. Like, what are the odds, Yeah.
This is the symbol that's, in various ancient sites all around the world going back thousands and thousands of years.
Exactly.
Coincidentally is encoded in one way or another in these civilizations, on their buildings or statues.
Right. And from all these civilizations I just discussed, and there are the civilizations where you find these anomalies of extremely large object that somehow overcame gravity, right? Yeah. And were moved, like in some cases, hundreds of miles, in in crazy terrain, like sand dunes,
up a mountain,
mountains, and, rivers, and
well, and then you have it where they line up to mirror Orion's belt, which is really makes you go, where multiple sites all are kind of mirroring what it looks like if we look at Orion's belt in the sky.
Right.
So here they're doing something we can't do today, even with our, great technology, with extreme precision. And then it's, we can't figure out how they did it. And there's some indicator to the stars, right?
Right. And it just doesn't, add up. And when you actually read all the texts in these ancient civilizations and their culture and all this, none of them claim to have made these buildings. None of them, there's not one, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of walls of hieroglyphs in Egypt, for instance. There's not one of them that shows the Egyptian, oh, by the way, this is how we built the pyramids. And this is,
you might want to mention that.
Right. I mean, it was the largest, most incredible effort humanity would have ever undergone. You would think they would have mentioned, this is how we did it, right? But there's plenty of walls. There's plenty of culture in these cultures that talk about that these all this was done by sun gods that came from the stars in flying boats, in boats that could hover in the sky, and many different, like the Vermanas and in the Vedic actually didn't just illustrates these objects that float in the sky as boats. It actually described them as flying machines. And so on. You're talking very ancient texts talking about things flying in the sky with people in it. You can, most of that stuff has been interpreted as, fantasy and all this by the archaeologists. But at the same time, the archaeologists cannot explain how these large objects were moved. Right. So, and I assure you, it wasn't people pulling on ropes and in the middle of the desert. I assure you.
I hear you. Now, there are some films, of course, about your work, like we've touched on the black hole and crossing the event horizon. And I hear you've partnered with filmmaker Malcolm Carter to create a soon-to-be-released film that's going to be called The Connected Universe. And it was actually Indiegogo's highest-funded documentary. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, it was
Congratulations
amazing.
On that.
Thank you. Well, congratulations.
Wow, what an accomplishment.
Thank you. That was great. Congratulations to the public for actually, participating.
Wanting that.
Yeah, and participating in something that matters, instead of, necessarily some of the more violent Hollywood movies.
Trivial.
But,
can you tell us a little bit more about what we can expect with that?
Right. Well, it's Malcolm is an amazing filmmaker. He made many movies for NASA and so on. He's a great documentary filmmaker, and so the imagery is incredible. And it basically lays down the discovery of this holographic mass solution for the proton in a very, easy to understand way, and as well with a lot of, application to. What does it mean to you? What does it mean to your life? What does it mean to humanity? It's an incredible movie, and it's almost finished, so it will be released in the spring. I'm really excited about it.
Wow, I can't wait to catch it. All right, well, now seems like a good moment to take a quick minute to tell those of you who aren't familiar a bit about our sponsor, Gaia. I've been a big fan of Gaia for many, many years now, which is why they are the only content provider I've ever reached out to in regards to potentially supporting the Positive Head podcast. So needless to say, I'm very excited they're now supporting the show. Gaia truly is my personal go-to source for streaming consciousness content on the web. They have an incredible 7,000 plus exclusive videos covering 5,000 years of wisdom. Just to give you guys an example, on April 24th on the show Buzzsaw, Dennis McKenna, who is the brother of the world's most well-known psychonaut, Terence McKenna, makes a guest appearance to discuss the spiritual implications and mystical experiences that psychedelic substances can induce. I mean, it'd be pretty hard to be more up my alley, right? And as you all hear me constantly say, it's a daily conscious effort to maintain an elevated vibration. And if you're looking to go deep down the rabbit hole to do so, then Gaia is the best place I know of to do it, period. And you can sign up for your first month for only 99 cents at gaia.com/positivehead. That's spelled GAIA.com/positivehead. Check it out. This leads to a question, and it kind of plays off of what you're just saying. You know, the connected universe sounds like it's going to really go into the implications of a lot of this stuff, a lot of the work you've been putting in over these years to help bring this stuff to the forefront. Do you feel physicists are now more open to this concept of unification and oneness, maybe than they once were? And dare I ask, they're more open to the concept of spiritual oneness?
I think so. We get more and more physicists coming to our side. There's more and more physicists interested. I mean, I get applications from PhD physicists in the institution everywhere. It's just that they're not necessarily very vocal about it, and that's an issue. But because there's so much backlash if they become vocal about it, like they will, some of them, lost their job or lost their position, or lost credibility with their peers and so on. But behind the scene, there's a great buzz going on, and because people are awakening, and not just public, not just people out there, but as well inside the institutions, including, political institutions, including even, security agencies, military agencies, and of course, inside the scientific community. So the new generation, is pushing on the more mature groups in the industry. So, for instance, I was watching a video of a lecture by I'm not going to name him, but a very, very prominent, well-known physicist, and one of the students, certainly from having studied my work, because what the physicist was saying seemed to be pointing to particle being entangled through wormholes, and little particles like subatomic particles being little black holes. And so the student asked straight up, "Are you saying that these particles are mini black holes?" And the teacher, the professor was a little uncomfortable, but said, "Yes, there is no evidence of a sharp separation between cosmological black holes and subatomic particles." So, I mean, this is somebody that's well known, that's very, and recently Stephen Hawking started to talk about how maybe we could power the Earth with mini black holes. And, it really is coming around now, and it's really exciting to see.
Yeah. What an exciting time to be alive.
Right.
Now, in the fall of 2014, you and your organization launched the Resonance Academy's delegate program, and you've had thousands of students through the program. Can you share a bit about that program and, students who would like to get more than an hour or so we have with you here today if they wanted to participate in the Resonance Academy? What's that like?
There's a lot of information that it was available in my research over the period of 30 years that I've been doing it. And it's, I had been going around the world giving these seminars that were like 3-day weekend seminars. And I was trying to cram all that stuff in somebody's head within, some 30 hours of lectures. And it was just ineffective. And so I'm really excited that now we basically have this incredible comprehensive course that you can take online, and you can go at your own speed, and you can dig as deep as you want or go as light as you want. You can get all the references so that when you talk to your friends and they say, hey, wait, I didn't think that was true, then you can pull out the reference and all this stuff. It's really an amazing course, and we get amazing reviews from it. People love it. And if they complete it, they really come out transformed. We have so many testimony, people like saying it completely changed our lives. So it's a great course to take, and people can just go to the resonanceproject.is, resonance. You just go to resonance.is, and they can register for the course.
Cool. Very cool. Now, you mentioned speaking live and trying to cram a lot of information in people's head, and that makes a lot of sense. I'm skimming the surface here. Obviously, a lot of this stuff can go very, very deep, and I love the idea of being able to take my time with it as well and really digest it. And sometimes you need to go over these concepts more than once. So I think it's a brilliant idea with the Resonance Academy. But for those that want to get a glimpse live and kind of see what that's like, are you speaking live? You still do the live talks, and are you doing any in the near future?
Right. Well, first of all, for people that are taking the course every month, I get on for 2 hours or an hour and a half, and answer questions for all the people that are taking the course. So they get to, have direct access to me and ask questions and connect with the community and we have people from over 40 different countries taking the course, thousands of people. It's so fun. People get to connect and make new friends and meet peers. But as well, I do give talks. I'm giving a talk, for instance, at the Conscious Life Expo in LA this weekend.
What date does that fall on? Because some people will listen to this right when I release it, and others, maybe after. What would that
it's
be?
This weekend. So I talk on the 20th, and I talk on the Monday the 22nd. So the Saturday the 20th and the Monday the 22nd. The Saturday is
February.
Of February, literally next week, or at the end of this week. And so, it will be, a little bit of a seminar on the Monday on the 22nd, and it's my public talk on the Saturday. And then I'll be on a panel as well with George Norrie that day on the Saturday. It should be a really fun time.
Yeah, I definitely. I'm not too far from there, so I'm going to try and make it myself if I can.
Great.
So this has been absolutely fascinating, Nassim. I really, really appreciate it. I do have, there's a couple questions that I always like to ask as sort of standard questions. One is, on the show, I love any stories of synchronicity or serendipity or a positive paranormal story, and I was curious if you had something fun to share.
Well, I have so many different incredible experiences. It's hard to pick one. I think that like more, and there was one thing I'd like to say is that I think that more you connect with the field of information and realize it's there and that you're constantly interacting with it, more the synchronicities kind of happen because the flow is coherent, so that the flow of information in the universe is not interrupted so much. So it's easier for things to the synchronicities to occur. So that's one thing I recommend. But yeah, I've had so many different incredible experiences, esoteric experiences. That some of them are actually so out there. They're hard to believe. I think what's important is that we we learn from these synchronicities, not to discard them, not, to appreciate them, not just to think, oh, it's just a coincidence. Actually, I'm coming to conclude very quickly that there's no such thing as coincidence at all. It's all very highly organized.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Well, last question I'd like to put you on the spot with. In 60 seconds or less, what is the meaning of life according to Nassim Haramein?
Oh, wow. That's in 60. Wow. It's epic. The meaning of life according to Nassim Haramein, I would say, if it was a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, it would be 42, but they missed it. It should have been 64. But, I think that...
Totally.
I think that...
I like that answer right there. If someone watches The Black Hole, they're going to understand that answer.
Right.
You can keep going, but I'm satisfied. 64.
64 is the meaning of life. But I think that, I think it's self-discovery at the end of the day. Learning and be excited about learning. And as we learn, as I'm proving, we're feeding information to the whole universe. So it's critical. We're like the probes of the universe, learning about ourselves. And so don't ever be down on yourself for having difficulties, because within our difficulties, that's when we get the greatest lessons.
Yeah, beautifully said. Challenges are blessings. And this has certainly been a blessing to have the opportunity to pick your beautiful brain. Thank you so much, Nassim, for taking the time to do this. And I look forward to our paths crossing again, hopefully sooner than later, and getting a chance to ask you more questions.
Thank you for having me.
Well, everyone, that concludes this week's interview episode. If you have enjoyed this positive download, take a minute, give us a rating or review on iTunes, since iTunes is the holy grail of all things podcasting. Your good reviews help us to reach more listeners. Also, we would be extremely appreciative if you would tell your friends and family about the show. Our sincere intent with the Positive Head podcast is to spread positivity to the world because we're selfish, quite honestly. I say that jokingly, but really only halfway joking. I'm referring to the good kind of selfish based on the knowing that we all get what we give in this life, because when we give, we're actually always giving to extensions of self, since we're all really one in the same consciousness, just in different bodies. So if you want to be a good selfish along with us by helping to spread the positivity, by all means, please proceed to shout about the Positive Head podcast from your rooftop. Otherwise, as you continue on your fabulous journey in this 3D reality, be sure to remember this. As long as you ain't dead, you're already positive ahead. Journey well, everyone, and thank you for being.